Welcome to the Brain Scrub, an improvised approach to mental health. I am your host, Glenn Sollers. Thanks for tuning in today. Last night, I went to see my mom, and I asked her a whole bunch of questions about my family history. What did her mom go through? What were her mom's siblings like? What were her parents like? And all these different things. And what I got from the whole conversation was a lot of self-awareness around why do I do certain things? And my mom looked at me, and she and I have a very different opinion about self-awareness work. And I've been through a lot of self-awareness work. And I know that our history really informs who we are in the present moment. What have we lived? What have we learned? What are those things that we were taught? What was role modeled for us? And if we don't look at those things, we might wonder, well, why is it that I just can't be a certain way? And if I can understand why I do what I do and what the brain patterning is and have some awareness to that, it allows me to become more conscious of my unconscious way of being. And then I can do something about it. I can say, well, that's why I did it. Now what? And before I move on, this episode has to do with maybe some of those things that we're dealing with, those emotions that we have, such as anger, that are more deep rooted. And maybe for much of our life, we have felt a certain way, or we're emotionally attached to something, and that becomes our identity. For me, I grew up with a lot of fear. I experienced a lot of anger. And there's so many great things in my life as well. And what I went through actually had a number of benefits in the career path I chose, the relationships I had, what I've learned, what I've developed, who I am today. But there's times where things get in my way. Today's episode is based on a book that I read, and it's called It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolynn. And this book was introduced to me about 3 years ago. The intent of the book is to look at one's history, generational things that happened, understanding that so that you can put the puzzle pieces together in respect to who I am, what do I do, and to know that certain patterns didn't start with us. It started with somebody else, but we carry it down like a tradition or a belief. Now, beliefs really drive our behaviors. I believe this, therefore I need to do that. And that is one reason religion was created, was a way to police community in a sense. That if we put out these beliefs here, people will behave a certain way. And it was done with the best intent. However, sometimes those beliefs can get in the way of different things. Sometimes it can create conflict. But at the root of it, religion was created to build a safe, fulfilling, respectful community so we could all work together. And this works in organizations, it works in teams. We work together to figure out, well, how do we want to work together? What do we all need to start doing? The reason I mention this is that families are no different. Family dynamics are no different. That a family will work together on being whatever they happen to be, based on their circumstances, based on what previous generations have been through. They will then form this way of being in community as a family. And as parents, we tend to bring down what we've learned, those habits, those ways of being to our kids, and then it moves on and on and on through generations and generations. And that's why we see this history repeating itself, which is a well-known term, and this happens, right? our forefathers did this, we do this, this is just how we do things. This is what we've learned. And behaviors and emotions are no different. This is what we've learned. This is what you do. The book's intent is to really evaluate what have different generations gone through and what has been the core language of those generations. And when I say core language, it is kind of like a belief. What is the core belief that we might have developed over time, which then informs how we behave in situations? That core belief becomes who we are, what we do, and what it states in the book is if I can actually understand what that is, I can stop a pattern from repeating itself. I can say, you know what? I don't have to go there. I choose not to go there, and I'm going to shift the way things happen. Now, for me, sadly, I read this book way too late. And if I knew some of the things and I could relate to this type of stuff earlier in life, if this was taught to me, things would have been likely a lot different in terms of how different things transpired in my life. And there's many pros, and again, there's many cons of what happened in my life. However, in school, what's interesting is we learn about the history of our country. We learn about the history of our world. We don't learn about the history of ourselves. And I believe if there was some attention at a primary education level for kids to do projects on their family history, what happened in their family, what did their parents endure, what did the parents of their parents endure? Because the problem is, by the time I read this book, it's kind of too late to talk to people because they're dead. And if I was younger, I could make greater sense of the world. And now, why is that important? Well, hello, why do we do history assignments in school? Why do we learn about the history? Because we learn from it. We can say, okay, this is not the way to go. This is what was done in the past. It's not really working. We need to shift things. Why don't we look at our own life? Once we can start looking at our own life, we can then start thinking about, I wonder what my previous generations went through and why they did what they did and what behaviors developed as a result. So I can start realizing the behaviors that might be limiting me or enabling me right now didn't start with me. They belong to somebody else, but were passed down like a gift. My driven nature, my need to control, my need to carry the world on my shoulders has led to success, but it's also led to failure in many respects because I always feel it's up to me to do things. Sitting around the table, and I asked my mom, I said, tell me a bit about your mom and her life and her siblings. And I didn't have a good understanding. I didn't even know my grandmother had a total of 2 brothers. I knew she had a sister. I didn't know she had 2 brothers. And that was all new to me. My grandmother grew up in what is now Poland. And I knew this part. Very wealthy family, entrepreneurs. They built homes. They built churches. They were very wealthy. When the war happened, everything was taken away. And they all had to rebuild. My mother was born just before everything was taken away, and she had a sister. My grandmother fled to southern Germany with her husband, and they had to start life over again. Sadly, my mom's father, and she never really knew him because he died at such a young age, died in the war, died fighting. So it was just my grandmother and her 2 daughters, my mom and my mom's sister. My grandmother also had another sister who was apparently not like the others, the ugly duckling of the family. And so she ended up not talking to the rest of the family, didn't have a good relationship. And then one of her brothers had two kids. And I didn't even know that. And I knew my uncle really well. He had a stroke a number of years ago, and he was always grumpy and angry at things. And Angry had a stroke, and it was a struggle. And this was at a young age. I was like 3 or 4, and he was like that back then. And he's passed away a long time ago. But I didn't realize he had two kids. And my mom told me that he estranged his two kids. He disagreed with their choices and let them go and didn't see them ever again. I was shocked when I heard that. And then she got into my grandmother's other brother who had the same situation. He lost contact with his children. And I'm like, oh my God. And then we got into my dad's side, and there was a bit of turmoil there as well. But what came through for me was my generational history, at least at my grandmother's level, was that parents didn't have anybody to really parent because of choices that were made through the relationships. And I don't know what those were. So again, my grandmother's sister had no children. My grandmother's brothers, they estranged their children. And I don't know what happened before that, but I do know that my grandmother's family was very entrepreneurial. They ran a business. When somebody runs a business, and I know this because I ran my own business, your focus is the business. And you have to get things done. So maybe, and I'm just speculating here, I don't know, maybe they didn't have time to parent in an effective way because they were more focused on supporting the family, growing the business. Now, then everything's taken away from you and you have to start over, which meant that they were carrying the world on their shoulders. That was up to them to figure things out and move forward. Can you imagine having everything taken away from you because of the choices of your government, and you have to flee where you live? And we see this happening all over the world. Ukraine is a relevant example in terms of what's happening now. But you have to develop and you have to change, and then you have to adopt new ways of being and doing, but you're still carrying what you've known and what you've learned into this new life that you're rebuilding. When my mom shared that with me, I had so many aha moments in respect to why is it that now my child is not in my life? And it's not about harping on that or complaining about that, but it's just understanding that it didn't start with me, that this was part of my history. Now, is it the right thing? No, not at all, right? It'd be so great for me to have a relationship. But then if I think about the behaviors that I had, there's so much I can't control in this situation because there's the other side of things as well. But for me, I was very driven. I was very go, go, go. I wanted to fix things. I felt I needed to control everything to a great extent. I took ownership of making sure that the family was safe, secure, and happy, which has its consequences. Why do I share this with you? Because it's important to think back about your history. And then again, we come up with this core language, and I'm still, based on this conversation I had with my mom yesterday, I'm still looking at my core language. I think it has to do with it's all up to me, or I'll be forgotten. There's different things that come to light for me. When I start considering this And the book takes you through a process in terms of what to do. And you think about your relatives, you think about your mother and father, you think about the relationship you had with them. Did you get love or from them? Did you fear them? What was your connection like? Did you feel like they had your best interests in mind? Like there's all these questions that you start asking yourself. And then you list these adjectives in terms of how would you describe things. Once you start doing that kind of stuff, you can then find some keywords or trends that show up through the language that you have about the language of your parents in terms of what you share about them. You can think about your siblings, your grandparents, all these different things, and you'll start noticing, again, these trends that form. These trends can lead into complaints. What do you complain about in life? I can complain that people don't always work hard enough, or I complain that people are spending too much money, or that we need to be more frugal. Now, where does that come from? So these core complaints, you'll start making linkages. Well, my family, they all ran businesses. Like my dad had his own business as well. My dad's dad had his own business. My dad's brother had his own business. We and I have a business-oriented family history. No wonder I'm more entrepreneurial in nature. No wonder I think about myself and what to do, and I take control of the situation, and that's how I do things. That's been learned over time. But now I can understand, well, that's why I complain about this, because I've learned run a business, manage your money. That can get in the way of things for sure. But it's also a good mentality to have, because if you don't save your money, if you're not frugal, then you just end up spending your money. And you may wonder, well, why don't I have any money? Well, hello, you're spending it. Once you can start evaluating what is it you complain about in life, chances are, again, in your generational history, there were similar complaints. And there is a core language that's formed in terms of those core beliefs that you might be bringing down from previous generations. And then you live that. When you, again, know all that stuff, you can then think back to people in your history, imagine them in your mind, and start to understand and start to put yourself in their shoes. And realize that they just did the best they could. Kind of like forgiving or acknowledging. And after that, I can move forward and say, it's time to create a new future. It's time to stop what happened in the past and go forward in a different way. Learning from the past allows us to create a new future. What worked, what didn't work, and then deal with things. This work is not always easy, this self-awareness work. And it's because we're dealing with neurological pathways that are being created from generation to generation because we're a byproduct of our environment. But it's important work, because the more I can connect with why I am who I am, the more power I have, the more freedom I have in terms of choice, in terms of what I do. So I'm not locked into old patterns because my behaviors have an impact on other people. The whole intent of this work that I've been taking you through in my podcast series is to create a better you. And not saying that who you are is not a good you, but who you are can change and shift. It's like anything in the world. We learn from experiences, we adjust accordingly, we figure out what can we do differently to have a better life and to create a better future for our children and future generations. And we're seeing this happen with climate change. we're at a point of no return. Who knows how long humanity is going to last? I don't know. However, we can slow down the cycle by thinking about, well, what did we do in the past? What have we learned from that? What can we do in the future? And we're starting to see technology emerge that's allowing us to do that. But if we don't take a moment to really think about what happened, why did it happen, what beliefs were formed, what needs to shift in our thinking. And that's important because regardless of what you implement in the world, you have to influence people to want to change things and to change the beliefs that they have embedded in themselves. And we see this happening in different parts of the world. The example I have is the United States, where there's a clear divide between what people think. And this is a hard one to deal with. And that's why I think there's going to be more and more conflict in the United States, because we're dealing with ingrained beliefs around it's my right to own a gun, or it's my right to choose for an abortion or not have an abortion. We're dealing with deep-seated beliefs that are limiting progress and creating, in many cases, more death and destruction and more hatred. But how do we change that? How do we change people? And that's going to be the toughest thing in respect to many global initiatives that we're after, is how do we change our way of thinking? The one thing I can control is me and my environment and how I choose to live. And what is the life I'm going to create? What do you want to create? What might be getting in the way? And remember, it didn't start with you. Folks, thanks for listening.